Hi, Jim here, just dropping in before this week's episode to tell you about my latest movie, The Apocalypse Box. It's a horror film and I'd love for you to check it out. If you go to apocalypsebox.co.uk, you can find all the links on where you can watch the movie. Right, let's get on with this week's episode. Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I'm speaking to visual effects guru and writer-director John Schlag. John's been in the industry a long time and has worked on some absolute classic movies like Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, Death Becomes Her, Star Trek Generations, and Forrest Gump. He's also recently moved into writing and directing and started working on his own short movies. So I chatted to John, obviously, about some of those classic films and sort of got some inside stories from the making of them. We also talked about his move into short films and some of the challenges he's faced now on his third career working as an indie filmmaker. Enjoy. You've worked on some pretty good movies, let's just say that. So tell me, first of all, how did you get into film?
That would be through computer graphics. So the NYIT, New York Institute of Technology Computer Graphics Lab on Long Island, was doing CG largely for advertising. There was an idea to make a feature film there, but the people who did that left and moved on to found Lucasfilm Computer Graphics, which then split into Pixar and Industrial Light and Magic's CG division that I was part of. So let's see, I was at Macromind for several years doing 3D graphics software, and then joined ILM for Terminator 2, and then was dropped into the mix of production.
Right. So had you gone onto that course with movies in mind, or was it just mainly advertising you were looking at getting a job in?
Oh, definitely. I'm not a film school person, but have a lifelong love of film, and that was the way to write software that makes pictures, and then get into making pictures myself, and learn about it, in vivo.
Wow. So Terminator 2 is a pretty good one to land on as your first movie.
It was.
I mean, and also a pretty, I don't know, it feels like one of those a little bit like Jurassic Park, but one of them ones that sort of seems everything changed after that. What was your role on that, and how did you handle coming in on a project like that?
Let's see. For Terminator 2, this was before ILM had an official software department, and everybody was just all sort of in the mix, and it was all very heterogeneous. And whatever skills you brought to the party, the people who ran the place were very good at conducting this sort of combinatorial optimization of management, like deploying people for their various skills on various tasks. So I was initially doing primarily software, but some of that software was what's called our rendering scripts, meaning you have a bunch of files sitting in a directory and you want to push the render button and you want to hit go. What happens when you do that? We would run these scripts that Steve Rosenbaum at the time was keeping an iron fist on. I took them over at some point along with Carl Frederick and my office mate for Terminator 2, and tried to bring a little more order to the controlled chaos that was ILM CG. And once you start doing that, you now have customers. You are the things that you do, people are using, and if you screw up, you're going to hear about it.
Yeah, I bet. And what are your memories from that production?
Well, day one, I interviewed, and during an interview, at least at that time and in that place at ILM, you did not see storyboards and things like that during the interview, all very hush-hush. But day one, you're signed in, whatever parts of your life or children you've signed away. And they gave me a walk through the binder of storyboards for the show. Some of the shots were fairly straightforward, with a lot of work maybe, but you could see how they would do that. And others, I'd turn the page and look at it for a minute and say, well, how are we going to do that? And the answer was, we don't know. It came as a huge surprise to me that you would bid a show and then you wait. And then if you are awarded the show, everybody celebrates, whee, and then goes, how are we going to do this? How many people do we need, and can we hire them all fast enough? And in some cases, what new technology do we need to figure out? So yes, there was quite a bit of improvisation and innovation on Terminator 2.
When you went in for that, had you seen the first one, and did you like the first one?
Yes, I definitely saw Terminator. I was living on Long Island at the time. I was at NYIT, and a few of us went to see it. And it was sort of high camp fun, and sort of like best B movie ever. And then when T2 was getting rolling, I had seen the teaser, I guess, which story goes, James Cameron got just like $100,000 or something to shoot a teaser trailer to drum up the money to make the film. And that was, I thought, incredibly well done. So at that point, yeah, I'm a fan.
You're in. And would you say in general, are you what's your sort of bag? Are you sci-fi, fantasy, dramas, comedy? What's your kind of genre choice?
Definitely science fiction. I lean heavily into that. Rarely, not really fantasy. Mainly hard science fiction. Typically, the more scientific stuff. I've been reading and cogitating and watching science fiction for over 50 years. I claim I've earned the right to complain, which I do occasionally. And now that I've begun writing it and filmmaking, I definitely skew heavily towards science fiction, although I've done some other lighter fare.
Right. Okay. So, all right, let me give you a hypothetical. If I had the financing now and I said, right, go off, because I know you're now, we will come to writing and directing, but now you're in that space. If I said, I've got the financing now, you can go and make any book or short story into a feature film, science fiction, what would you pick?
Oh, any book or feature film? This is a sort of bad question for my type of memory. I tend to associate things well. I don't have a sort of mental Rolodex I can go through quickly. But many years, decades ago, Marion Zimmer Bradley, most famous, of course, I think, for The Mists of Avalon, published a book of short stories. And in that book, there is a lovely atmospheric piece called The Wind People. And I just loved it. I used to reread it, once a year or so. Possible maybe I would do that, but I am mainly concentrating on being my own screenwriter, writer, producer, director.
Yeah, doing your own stuff. I get it. And then just to cover off some of the other amazing things you've worked on. So I've got, and these aren't in any order. Death Becomes Her, again,
Yes.
fabulous comedy. Any memories from that production?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there was one of my favorite things in that business is the brainstorming meetings. And the one we had, I think, with Alex Seiden and Doug Smythe and others at ILM was figuring out how to put a hole in Goldie Hawn's abdomen. It was a really offbeat piece of work. And lo and behold, it has gotten a new lease on life on Broadway. I think it's a musical of all things. Seems crazy, but there it is.
Yeah, it's nuts, isn't it? And I wonder how they're doing that bit in particular, because it is an iconic moment.
I'll hopefully be in New York in the spring or summer. It would be great fun to see it.
Yeah, definitely. And then I've got Star Trek Generations. So obviously, if you're sci-fi, you into your Star Trek?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I am old enough to have seen Trek Original. What do they call it? The original series, transmitted live over the airwaves as a kid, and was instantly hooked. Subsisted for a long time, of course, on reruns, and then the films started coming out. Yeah, I've always been attracted to the Trek universe because it is among many dystopian post-apocalyptic pieces. The Trek's vision of the universe is attempted positive.
Yeah. Seems like a fantasy now, the way the world is going. But it's nice. It's nice to watch. Isn't
No comment.
So working on Star Trek Generations must have been cool. And I think I've seen a picture of you in an outfit. Is that right? Have you worn them?
Yes. We occasionally would have to shoot elements of some sort. We had there's a storm that sweeps across. I think it's the planet Viridian that destroys the planet, but people are trying to run away from it anyway. And we put down a John Knoll, as the VFX soup, called for a huge blue tarp to be put down on the parking lot, clear all the cars out. A bunch of us had costumes as extras. And there's a fun shot of me just burning time waiting for things to be set up, playing ping pong in a Star Trek Next Generation uniform.
Nice. And can you see yourself in the movie or not? Is it too quick to notice you in it?
Well, it's not only too quick. I'm probably only 2 or 3 pixels tall.
Oh, right.
Along with dozens of other people who are running across the parking lot at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha. And then, and all these projects you're working on, were you part of a team that was getting hired in for these projects, or were you going for the particular jobs on different productions?
Oh, let's see if I understand your question right. Well, short answer is everything's a team. These are all smallish to large-ish team projects, and the way the team works together is absolutely critical. There at ILM, as in many other visual effects houses, there's a sort of plexus of people underneath who are supporting all the shows, and the shows crop up each as a sort of adhocracy. A team is assembled for this show. They execute for 2, 3, 4 months, or maybe a year, and then disband and are taken up. Some people will leave the company and go somewhere else following other projects, or unfortunately be laid off, or they will get picked up by other shows. So for Star Trek Generations, I was walking around the building recruiting, scarfing up people who I knew were coming off other shows, and some of whom I had worked with previously and wanted to work with again, and thought, how do you spend your summer vacation? Blowing up a Klingon bird of prey.
So then let's talk about Jurassic Park.
Sure.
So that's another big, huge movie. So what are your memories of that?
Well, before I forget, my wife is for Infinovation Film, is our communications director, and she always reminds me to tell people that the documentary made by Scott Leberecht, featuring Steve Williams, Spaz, as he was the modeler and animator of the T-Rex and other things for Jurassic Park. The documentary made about him it was called Spaz, but came out released under the title Jurassic Punk. And I appear in it as myself, and I'm basically the straight man, because of course Steve is the colorful character, and there are other colorful characters therein. But at any rate, my memories of Jurassic Park were that we spent a very long time, like over a year, on pre-production, just sort of trying to figure out what we needed to figure out, lacing together bits of technology. And some of the software I was writing for Jurassic Park got picked up and used on Death Becomes Her. We also pilot tested Softimage, as I recall, on Death Becomes Her. And that was a sort of, jumping off point for many of our, both for our human talent, for them to build their skills, and for us, we who were building software.
When you say you're building this software, I'm imagining code. Is it code, or is it a combination of that and some sort of Photoshop style thing? How does it work?
Oh, good question, because solving problems in visual effects, some problems come along and they're very like the last one you had. Others are completely different. So you feel like you're making it up and improvising all the time. And ILM, of course, was on the cutting edge, still is, of visual effects. We would happily do, a few dozen to a few hundred shots that were very much like things you'd seen in the past as bread and butter work. But mainly what we really wanted to do was the groundbreaking work. And Dennis Mirren and Ken Ralston and various Scott Squires and various others, the visual effects soups who led the charge on this, were always out bidding new work and trying to figure out how to do things, and motivating us as crew to get that work done.
The other one I was going to mention, because I think I've seen a behind the scenes shot of you sat in front of like an old style CRT computer, was Forrest Gump.
Right.
So which is a movie that you don't straight away associate with visual effects, but obviously there's lots of bits where you've put him in lots of different places. Tell me about that film.
Yes, I came onto that one as ILM was the Gump crew were kind of getting buried. I mean, they're doing good work. It's just not being done fast enough. So Steve Rosenbaum and George Murphy, who were the CG soups on that show, working under Ken Ralston, the VFX soup, brought me on as a sequence supervisor to deal with basically crowd replication. So the China ping pong sequence, the crowds back there. Also, the ping pong ball in that sequence is CG, which most people don't know. Tom Hanks, despite his many talents, cannot hit a ping pong ball like that. So they just set up a metronome and he mimed the motions, and we put the ball in there. Also, the crowds in the football stadiums, and then the DC War Memorial sequence. So a crew of about a half dozen of us cranked away on all that for, I don't know, 4 to 6 months.
And I obviously, if I'm editing or if I'm doing anything in After Effects, for example, render time, I'm sat there going, oh, come on, 3 minutes. So how long does something like that take? How long are you waiting when you press the button?
Oh, more than 3 minutes, definitely. Yes. Even Forrest Gump was more a 2D, a compositing show than 3D, spaceships and lasers and things. And we were also putting very new software. Michael Natkin had written an entirely new compositing package called iComp. And we kind of dragged that kicking and screaming into production on Gump the way we had dragged earlier software into production on Jurassic Park. So it's running tens of minutes, or in some cases over an hour or two per frame.
So talking about visual effects, are there any sort of common personality traits for people who work in that industry?
Flexibility? I don't know. I mean, as I said, you just never know what's coming down the pike. And, the people I've worked with over decades, with very few exceptions, have been collegial, good problem solvers, good, high marks on stick-to-itiveness, tenacity. And, I don't know. And there's a mix of specialists, people who just know how to crush this one thing really, really well, and generalists whom you can deploy onto various projects and move them around based on what's needed. And it's, putting my sort of producer hat on, which I was not at ILM, but now am. I felt it was really great to have a real mix of talent, and for that matter, personalities on board. You don't want stormtroopers. You don't want clones. You want individuals who are, quirky and funny. And long afterwards now, it's documented. I don't know whether it was Harvard Business Review or MIT or Sloan or somewhere that did studies that showed diverse teams make better decisions. Diverse teams function better. So that eventually that was around the time I was really getting this through my thick skull that, yeah, you want to actually go and recruit for that.
I know this is a hard one because it's been a long time since you started that career, but what would your advice be to somebody who wants to get into visual effects?
That's interesting because there are people who sort of come in from all angles. Some people come from the art trench and then learn how to, write scripts or, do macros or do some programming or whatever. There are people who come from software who learn more about art and composition and light and shadow. There are as many ways of getting into CG as VFX, maybe as there are artists. I'm not sure. Math is a great background to have, even if you're just trying to figure out how much disk space your your frames are going to take up. Um, and beyond that, there are, I think, very few people in the VFX area, have actually gone to film school. But it does help to understand how to read a screenplay, what it is and what it isn't, and at least understand once you're zoomed in on one shot and one frame and one pixel, how that serves some kind of a story beat that is going to get the story across.
Which leads me on to what you're doing now, which is writing and directing and producing. So what brought that about? What made you go, right, I'm going to start making my own stuff now?
Good. Yeah, it was great fun. In some ways, never as much fun before or since being part of the visual effects machine. When you are part of that machine, you are typically a small cog in a very large machine. You get to, it's visible. You get to show your family what you do. They can go to the movies, your name in the credits, and all that's great fun. But eventually, I became interested first in what makes a good story. Because, well, of course, we won't name names or titles, but we've all been to films that we feel were not made from a great story. It's kind of like the realtor saying location, location, location. For filmmakers, it's story, story, story. Without a good story, everything else you do is not going to save that film. So my wife is a published novelist. She writes children's literature, kidlit. And so around our house, when I started getting serious about learning about story, it's kind of all story all the time. So, we're listening to this podcast in the car, or, we're reading this craft book, or, helping out with this project, or reading each other's work, or whatever. So I got interested in what makes a good story, started screenwriting and, applying myself to it, like going back to school. But also when you start screenwriting, you can send out a screenplay and what do? You wait by the phone, but you don't wait by the phone. You start writing something else in the meantime, right? But still, you're basically waiting. It's a big waiting game. And so at that point, sending my first couple of screenplays out, my wife is looking at me like, welcome to my world, because this is what you do. You write a manuscript and send it to your agent. And the publishing industry, at least the traditional publishers, are glacially slow. There's very little transparency into the process. So I decided it isn't just a screenwriter that I want to be. What I really want to be is a filmmaker. I want to learn filmmaking from soup to nuts. And so rather than trying to go from visual effects and get a directing gig, which in some ways looks like it should be your next step, I decided to go, loop around and go all the way to the bottom of the food chain and start making short films, micro budget, and at least in one case, zero budget, to learn how to make a film from soup to nuts. Learn casting, learn editing, learn more about actors and how they work.
Having made, how many have you done? You've done a couple of shorts, have you?
Oh, let's see. Film number 5 is Ovax, and that is out at the film festivals now. I am eyeball deep in film number 6, which is another short film, which takes me back to my visual effects days, because you mentioned After Effects earlier. I am buried in After Effects.
Buried in After Effects, nice. And what would you say you wish you would have known making your first short film that you now know on your 6th one?
It took a while to get the first short film. It's called Party for One. It was filmed just around the corner from me in Mill Valley, California, at the 2 a.m. club. And I had, it's making a little longer, brief version, started writing screenplays, writing features, and realizing that's too expensive, it's too complex. 3 of those, and then the 4th one I wrote deliberately as a two-hander. It's called Two Women in a Hospital. And thought, okay, this is something that could be made possibly on money I can finance myself. And still, when I'm thinking too long, too complex, too many moving parts, I don't know enough about the filmmaking process yet. So a friend of mine, a screenwriter, Renee, up in Vancouver, had had been hitting me with the idea, uh, what about shorts? If you grew up like my wife and saying, you want to write novels, people tell you, hey, do you think maybe you want to write some short stories first? And it's very similar for filmmakers. Shorts are great practice. You can zone in on one aspect of the craft in a short, or you can make a sort of long or what would have been a longer story and compress it with use of montage or whatever. So back to your question, sorry, getting that first film off the ground, I had written my first short called Vapor Trail, and Dave Moutre from San Francisco gifted me a couple hours of his time. We sat down in a bar, and at the end of that, had a budget. First time I had a budget in a spreadsheet, and it was still a lot of money for a short. So I thought, let's get even simpler. And my wife tried a series of short stories, basically, flash fiction, like, tell me a story in 500 to 1,000 words. Tried a series of those on me, and one of them lit up. I thought, oh, this is makeable. And we went back and forth on it a few times. I did the conversion. I did the adaptation from her short story to a screenplay, and I'm still thinking producer, producer, producer. That is, I need a producer that is not in my skill set, that is not something I know how to do. And I just felt stuck. And finally, one Sunday morning, we're sitting on the sofa reading the New York Times, and I turned to her and said, hey, you're a really good project manager. She's like, yeah. That at this level of filmmaking, that's really all a producer is a glorified project manager. Let's just do this ourselves. And we did. And by the time it was done, it came in at a budget that was less than half of what I would have bid for it beforehand. So it was based on what I learned prior. So I guess that is really getting micro budget filmmaking. That is what I did not know how to do. I was not schooled in that. I was not versed in it. I did not have a mentor to help me through that process.
Yeah. It is a bit of a baptism of fire, especially
Yes.
when you're spending your own money, because the advantages of having a partner as your producer, so my wife's my producer, is that if it is your own money, no one's going to keep a tighter handle on that than the person you live with and share the finances with.
Yes.
Even if you've got a producer who's a really good friend, obviously they're not spending their own money. So it's and also it's about making that money go as far as possible, isn't it? And putting it all on screen and not
Yes.
wasting
Put
it.
the money on the screen. Absolutely.
Do you think what skills do you think you've taken from the visual effects into filmmaking?
Preparation, in a word. Visual effects, people tend to prepare a lot. Storyboard heavily. Mistakes in visual effects tend to be expensive. And so to the extent possible, things are planned out ahead of time. Maybe it was Spielberg who said the only bad plan is no plan. You can go onto the set with a plan. You can depart from the plan. You can improvise. You can use what the set or the actors provide, the location. But no plan is a very bad idea. So just being really thorough, really assiduous about figuring out the blocking. We visited the bar where we filmed several times beforehand, and in a walkthrough rehearsal, we had the two principal actors there, and I just used my wife's DSLR to frame up a bunch of angles, shoot a little video, and I took it back home and edited it together in Premiere just to make sure I wasn't doing something really boneheaded and skipping across the line or missing some angle that would have been more flattering to the actors or whatever. And so it was pretty straightforward when it came time to film the thing.
Preparation is key, and that crossing the line thing, it shouldn't be as hard as it is. But when you've been filming all day and you're tired, and I've had it before with I've been chatting to the DOP, and we're both so tired and so exhausted that we're having trouble. Then what we would do is we would play back a shot and go, okay, we're fine, it is. And then 5 minutes later, you'd be thinking again, hang on, no, wait a minute. And I did last film I did had maybe like 8 people in one room. And that is a nightmare for crossing the line because you're cutting all over the place and having to worry about who's talking to who and whereabouts in the frame they've got to be.
Was it conference room scene, or were the people moving? Were they sitting down?
So the one I've just done is called the Apocalypse Box, and it's kind of like a conference room. They all get trapped in this room with a magic box that grants wishes. It's a horror film. So yeah, it's kind of like a round room with a projector, but yeah, having to figure out not only the crossing the line and getting it right spatially, but also you don't want to just do that. You want to also add something that's going to tell you something about the character and that's going to kind of make the scene flow properly. So it's kind of embedding that geography of the room in your head. And like you say, the planning is so important for that, because if you've messed that up, if I'd have messed that up, 8 characters, and got back in the edit suite when everyone's gone home and I've spent all the money on the film, it's too late to then start reversing shots and trying to fix it.
Yes. In some cases, I have flipped a shot horizontally. In some cases, I have run some frames backwards, as long as there was nothing in the background that would give it away. But yes, since you bring up editing, I came to love editing. I started out also thinking that I would need an editor, but I've come to love editing, trying to get better at it, and amazingly, you practice something and you get better at it, like playing the piano. So, but these first few films, what I've realized is when you are editing, and you see your best friends don't need to tell you what you did wrong while you were directing, when you are the one left to clean up the mess in the editing suite, right? So yeah, it's been great fun. It's sort of an asterisk item on what you were saying. In preparation for OVAX, the latest short film that we filmed last summer in Vermont, there's a table with 8 people around it, and it's a conference room scene. So they're mainly sitting still. There's some entrance at the beginning and exits at the end. A few people exit in the middle. And I went and looked at a series of conference room scenes, and there's a really amazing one from, I'm blanking on the name of the film, but it's about the fall of Lehman Brothers, Zachary Quinto, Kevin Spacey, Jeremy Irons. At any rate, there's a couple of conference room scenes in there, and they're absolutely terrific. And what I realized looking at them was there's so much fur flying around that it's like there's no line. And especially if you're cutting between close-ups, the audience doesn't know they lose track of where the other characters are positioned, and nobody cares whether you get this side or that side of some actor or whatever. It's good to be able to use their eye movements and head movements when they look to someone to cut on that point. And if you're kind of guaranteed physical continuity because the people are sitting still. It's harder if they get up and start moving around. But yeah, really, really came to love editing.
Yeah, editing's good, and it's a good skill to know, especially if you're directing, because you can sort of bank stuff as you're going along. Go, yeah, I've got that. That'll cut with this. That'll cut with that.
Yes, I edit while I'm filming. Yes.
Yeah, you have to. Unfortunately, with my scenes in that room, they were all moving all over the place. So, like you say, that getting the eye like, right, you're going over there. My tip for that was, and I did it. I wish I'd had enough money to do rehearsal days, because obviously that would have made it even better. But we spent the first day on a wide shot, which I don't think I even used in the film, but that wide shot meant that we played the first 15-20 minutes of the film and knew exactly where everyone was going to be. And I think it just kind of solidified that for me and the crew. Yeah.
Right. Well, in that case, you're rehearsing on the set with a full crew, which is expensive. I found it for that conference room scene in particular. My wife, Jennifer, who serves as co-producer, sometimes co-writer, and 15 other things in the 89 things you have to do to make a film. She and I pulled together a rehearsal at a local college. Our production designer, turns out his dad is a professor there, and found us a conference room roughly the size of the one we were intending to film in. And running that all through and doing the blocking, it meant that when we got to the actual location, It was about adjusting and fitting in rather than blocking from scratch. So, rehearsing with a few people and no crew, that's cheap. Rehearsing on the set with a full crew, that's expensive.
Unfortunately, my actors were from all over the place, and I think the cost of them accommodation,
Getting them
travel, all
in.
that, would have
Yeah,
been
the budgets for that are interesting because one of my favorite stories, Sarah Polley, I think it is, who directed Women Talking about the events in South America, insisted that the entire set be finished 3 weeks before commencement of principal photography to have rehearsals. And apparently, she is, such a director as to be able to, stamp her foot a bit and get this. I think it shows in the film. I love it. At the same time, Craig Mazin, who does the Script Notes podcast with John August, Craig Mazin wrote and was the showrunner, I guess you'd call it, for a limited series on HBO called Chernobyl. It's all about, it doesn't sound maybe like it would be that interesting, but it is. It's fascinating, the combination of technology and politics that brought Chernobyl to the disaster it was. The end of it, afterwards, Jared Harris is talking on a podcast like your own, and he's talking about the closing. It's sort of a courtroom scene. It's like a kangaroo court. It's more sort of an inquest. And it's a long scene. He's explaining how the disaster happened. It's very complex in its, there's a lot of people in the scene, but they're not moving around much. But his long monologue and bits of dialogue explaining this are really difficult to follow. And he said, we did our first take, and somebody said, okay, is that it? Do you want to do it again? And he said, well, of course we want to do it again. That was just a rehearsal, because HBO would not give them the time, give them the budget to rehearse, which, to me is just insane.
That's nuts. Because I remember that scene, because I think he uses diagrams in the end, doesn't he? He sort of goes, for this to have gone wrong, this has to go wrong.
Right. He's got a sort of ladder with cards that he's putting in it, almost like, a time card rack, explaining about what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's kind of explaining it to us more than the court, but it's a nice
exposition.
way of...
It's very late in the game exposition, sure. But it plays well, and Harris is fantastic. And it just floored me that was, the first take of that long shot was rehearsal.
Yeah, that's nuts. I'll just finish off with a couple of fun questions.
Sure.
One is, have you got a motto? Have you got like a mantra or anything like that you live by?
Oh, sure. Several of them. One of them is to tell people, I am not just open to your collaboration. I'm relying on it. There's the school of thought that says, don't get creative. I hate that. Well, we all know to whom that's typically attributed, no names. And then there are, at the other end of the spectrum, there's sort of improvisational live theater where the entire cast and director make it up and then maybe script it. I'm, well into the middle of that. I write a screenplay ahead of time and rehearse it, and there are several drafts, typically with input from the actors and other people who read, the producer. So it's definitely about collaboration.
And then the other one was what's your best use of visual effects in a film or television show that you didn't work on?
Ooh, good one. Oh, wow. Yeah, again, I'm not a good one for sort of riffling through my mental Rolodex on this. When I was at ILM, Ken Ralston, who was the visual effects soup on Gump, brought up Children of Men for some really smart use of visual effects. Some of my favorite visual effects are invisible, set extensions that save you gobs of money. So I think that is a really good example. There's nowadays there's so much CG, so much VFX. It's difficult to choose from, really.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.